we like to differentiate self-employment and employment and think these are two different things. For me, it's the same thing. The employers are different. Every human being is a creation of God, an artistic creation of God.
Hi, Javier. Welcome to the Startup Evangelist.
Thank you.
I think for me, knowing you as a friend, I think there's a lot we could talk about.
Yeah.
Of course, this would focus more on career and just the professional angle.
Yeah.
But just for the people who don't know you, probably just a brief about yourself.
Okay.
Key highlights about your life and those that have brought you to the chair you're sitting on. Let's
Wow.
go.
Okay. So my name is Javier for the Kenyans and Javier for the non-Kenyans.
For the expatriates.
Yeah, for the expatriates. Yeah, for the expatriates. Yeah, you know, there are people who, when I say I'm Javier, they're like, is that the correct pronunciation? And yeah, but anyway, you know, it's parents who decide how to pronounce your name. I'm a Kenyan. So, you know, born, you know, and raised in a town called Nakuru in Kenya by two wonderful parents. You know, I'm a hybrid. My parents are from different tribes, which is, I think, is such a big blessing. I have two siblings. Then I'm married to one wife, and we have three kids. And then professionally, I am a finance guru or professional. Currently, you know, working for an international development organization. And yeah, it's been an interesting journey, but I think also what's really important for me to say is that I'm born again, you know, because, you know, my relationship with God determines how I do life. Yeah. So yeah, that's me and many other things. I mean, the other day I did like an audit of my life, and there were like 17 things on the list that I do. So I've just said about 5 of them. The other 12. Yeah, for another time.
Yeah.
Yes.
And one thing I know about you, sort of have this high energy. You bring high energy in everything you do.
Okay.
So I don't know how you got it from. Is it a personality, and like what sort of drives you around the things you do?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because there's a colleague of mine. Usually when I tell them I'm tired, they're like, no, you cannot be tired. You know, you always have high energy. I guess it's personality. I guess it's how God just wires us. I mean, trust me, I have my moments when I'm on low on energy. A lot of times when I'm at home, but when I'm doing something that I'm passionate about, something that, you know, I have my heart and mind to it. I usually, if I put my mind to something, I have to get it done well. So yeah, I'd say maybe it's a personality. But because I also said I'm born again, I think there's no way you can have the Spirit of God in you and be like a zombie. You know, there's also the energy that comes from just the Holy Spirit residing in me and in someone. You know, you end up having this vibe, you know, this energy, this strength to do stuff.
Cool.
Yeah.
Maybe just now that we've sort of focusing on career, you're running the Career Dialogue podcast. I think for me, what I would like to understand, I know we have a lot of jargon. One jargon we talk about is career growth.
Yes.
So what do we mean by career growth, and basically what has it been for you?
Okay. So career growth. So for me, this is how I like to look at it. When we are born, each of us, you know, Ephesians 2:10 says we are God's masterpiece. So every human being is a creation of God, an artistic creation of God. You know, much as, you know, you can generalize and say there are men and women, and men are like this and women are like this. But even if you take one gender, say the men, you'll find there's every man. We can be biologically the same, but also different. You know, we are different in our physique, we are different in our color, complexion, we are different in our personalities. There are so many things, And even if you go down and say, okay, let's take men who are extroverts, and you break it down, there's no extrovert who's like the other. And for me, that just tells me how uniquely God has created each of us. Now, that's important because because of that, God has created us uniquely, but also I feel like God puts in us abilities, skills, gifts, opportunities in seed form. Yeah, God doesn't give us complete product. Say, if you're a finance professional like me, interestingly, when I was younger, I got drawn to finance. There was a certain interest of finance, so I studied finance. Yet my brother and sister didn't study finance, although we came from the same womb. But that interest was in seed form. So as I went to study it in school, and then I started practicing it in my profession, that seed is growing to produce fruit. So if someone meets me right now and he met me back in campus, he will say, okay, the things you know now are not the things you knew in campus. So for me, career growth is basically recognizing what is this skill that you have, recognizing that it's been given to you in gift form, and what God expects of us is, in fact, someone said God is a businessman. So he has invested that seed in you, and what he expects is that it produces fruit. So if you translate that to career growth, it means if you started maybe just as an accountant, growth means you're not just accounting for a small business. At some point, you account for a much bigger business. At some point, you account for the government. There's no reason why, as an accountant, you can't be the CS or the central bank, governor, because your capacity to interpret numbers, your capacity to analyze numbers and advise on those numbers grows with time. Yeah. So growth for me, that's it. Just recognizing that the skill you have is God gives you in seed form.
Yeah.
But growth is when we can see fruit. And fruit is impact. A tree does not eat its own fruit. When that thing that is in you, people can actually benefit from it. People can say, because I'm connected to Dan, when I have conversations with Dan on energy, I come out of there having learned, or Dan's knowledge impacts me. Then I'd say Dan has grown. So that's how I look at career growth.
So you've sort of tied career growth to more like an external effect rather than internal, rather than the quote unquote vain metrics of title, salary, etc. Sort of how does that your evolution as an individual, as a professional, affect the people around you? That's quite interesting. And maybe just to unpack the whole issue of career, we are seeing a lot of change. I think the demographics are changing in the workplace. Cultures, technology, there's a lot of disruption. So how would we sort of effectively grow in that sort of constant change environment, if I may ask that?
Back to the analogy of our skills are given to us in seed form. Now you realize if you take let's say the simplest of seeds, a maize seed. A maize seed would do very well in certain environments. So for instance, we know like in Kenya, maize is one of those seeds that grows generally well in very many areas, but it requires a certain amount of rainfall. It requires a certain amount of soil to grow. And when you talk about environment, sometimes that's what it is. That the skills that we have been given, for them to thrive, they need a certain environment. But then the big question is then, because a maize seed cannot thrive in any environment, how then, as a career professional, do I move with a changing environment? So the way I look at it is, if you think about countries like Israel, where it's a desert, naturally you'll find that maybe if you took a maize seed in that desert, it will not grow. But Israel has somehow found a way to use soil technology, to use irrigation, to use all these technologies that even a seed that naturally would not grow in that environment will be able to grow. So I think as a professional, for you to adapt and grow with a changing environment, one is to study the change and see how do I adapt to that change. So for instance, if you're a finance professional, maybe, you know, all you, let me give an example. Just the other day, I was thinking about, you know, how we do reporting, for instance. You realize that how you do report for your team of professionals is not how you do a report for a shareholder.
I see.
When I'm sending a report to my team of normal finance professionals, I'll send them a complicated, the jargon guys. I'll send them a complicated Excel sheet with models and all that. Yeah. But if I'm going to report to my CEO, he probably just needs 3 lines on email that has summarized all that jargon. So it's the same information, but the messaging is different because it's adapting to a different environment. And I think it's important as a professional to also to study your environment, but also to study your audience. So that when you're doing when you're giving a product, or when you're giving a report, for instance, it's customized to your audience. Yeah. And that takes flexibility. That takes being open-minded. That takes coming out of, you know, things have always to be presented on Excel. Yeah. I'd say it will take a change of mindset to know that if the environment is changing, you also have to change. You have to be willing to change your mindset. Because, you know, the environment is external. Technology is here to stay. You will probably have little control over technology.
It's a one-way street.
It's a one-way street, yeah. So the only person who has power to change is yourself. Yeah. You might not be able to change the external, but you can change how you view something. You can change how you interpret something. Yeah. So I think I'd say in a snapshot is, you know, it's important to have the attitude of always adapting, changing your mindset, you know, always. And it doesn't matter how complicated the field is, always thinking through if the environment is changing, how do I change with this environment so that I remain relevant? Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And then now from the context of, we've talked about, let's say, on the individual side, which is like the supply of labor.
Yeah.
On the demand side, the organizations, we are now seeing the, you know, millennials, Gen Zs are the sort of increasing you know, proportion of the workforce. And sometimes even organizations do not know how to adapt to effectively, you know, create a conducive environment for these guys. So from an organization perspective, what should be done there? What should happen? Yeah.
So, you know, this thing we call organization, what is it? You know, an organization, if you take an example like Safaricom, Safaricom, from the face value, it's the building on Wayakiwe.
Yeah.
But also we know that, you know, Safaricom is Ndegwa, and Ndegwa is Safaricom.
Yeah.
So for an organization to adapt to like what's happening, what you've asked about, you know, the Gen Zs being more vocal, being more proactive, it means that those who lead those organizations have to be willing to change. You know, someone said the culture of organization is determined by the leaders. Leaders shape the culture of that organization, and especially top leaders, top managers. They shape the culture of that organization because they have the authority, they have the power to do so, they have the influence to do so. So I'd say that, you know, if for an organization to adapt, the leaders of that organizations have to be the ones who open up their minds to adapt. Yeah. You know, the other day we were having a debate with my former classmates in campus. And so there was this whole debate, and it was just related to what's been happening in our country with the Gen Z movement. And so there was a debate about, you know, if we have proper systems in the country, then, you know, we wouldn't have, you know, loopholes for corruption and things like that. And for me, I was arguing differently. I was like, but who makes systems? You know, systems are made by human beings. For me, the human element is actually way more important than the system. Because I remember back in campus, we used to be told, and I think it's true, that the people who used to make the computer viruses were the same guys who used to make the antivirus. You know, the virus didn't manufacture itself.
The problem and the solution.
The problem and the solution were made by a human being sitting somewhere. Yeah. So for me, I'm a strong believer in the power of leadership determining the direction organizations to go. So to be able to respond, for instance, to the Gen Zs and they want to be heard more, it means the leaders have to be willing to listen. And it's very interesting what happened. I think, they say that President Ruto is probably the first African president to have an engagement with young people on X space. I mean, that was quite something. I mean, people might say, it was a PR stunt, whatever, but I mean, it was something.
It was bold, yeah.
It was bold.
Yeah.
I mean, it was really bold. To come to a space where you will be abused, that was really bold.
Yeah. And even I was seeing that, I think, was it his or the other one? It was like over 100,000 people.
Yeah.
Which is like the size of 2 Nyayo stadiums.
That's the thing. Can you imagine?
At no cost.
At no cost. That's the thing. But you see, that's the adaptability we're talking about. Because I remember initially he had said, I want to meet the Gen Zs instead. I was like, no. We don't want to meet you there. You can be sure they would have spent money on chai and mandazi and the guys would have to use transport and all these things. Yeah. But I mean, there was a space that was available. But for me, that told me something, that this is a leader who's willing to adapt to change. The challenge is a lot of times, because leaders have the power that they have, because sometimes leaders are probably older people, especially for big organizations. It's harder to change as you grow older. Naturally, it's harder to change as you grow older. You become more rigid. Bad experiences have shaped the way you think. Yeah. So sometimes, and you look at young people, you're like, these people don't know. They have not been where I am. I mean, even the president, I remember one time he was being challenged to shuffle the cabinet. And his response was, you don't have the job I have,
I see. Yeah.
So sometimes there's that attitude that, the Gen Zs don't have the job I have. They don't have the experience I have, so they have nothing.
It comes out quite like a dismissive kind of
It's like a dismissive tone, yeah? But, even just me being a dad, the few times I've taken to listen to my kids, sometimes they say some things I'm like, okay, that's actually it's not a bad idea. Yeah. Like we can actually do it your way.
Yeah.
So for me, for organizations to adapt, the leaders have to adapt. Yeah. If top leaders adapt, if top leaders decide to listen, that culture will flow down. Because a story is told of how Bob Collymore of Safaricom used to go, like for lunch, he would just go to the cafeteria with his with the staff, and he just wants to hear their conversations, and those conversations would shape how they run, they run Safaricom. Yeah. I was going through a leadership course the other day, and the trainer was recommending that top leaders need to lead by walking around. That every week you need to take time and just walk amongst the people normal, at work, what you call the normal guys. Don't just sit in your office and just hear what they're saying. The other day, one of the leaders I respect in my space told me how she wanted to know, because she's really up there, she wanted to know what the staff think about her. And what she did, she talked to the driver and said, tell me, what do people say? What do people say about me? Just be candid, be honest with me. What do they say about me? Do you think I should change 1, 2, 3? And I thought that was really bold for a CEO or a director to talk to the driver. I mean, that's someone who listens.
Yeah.
And if people know that the leader listens, then the culture will change. The other managers, all the way down, people will start listening. I think that's how you manage, whatever is happening right now. Because what the Gen Zs want, they just want to be heard. It's not like they have all their ideas need to be implemented, but they just want to be heard.
It's like someone was asking me, what's the revolution? And sometimes when people have grown prior to this sort of generation, we always think revolution as a very violent term. But it seems like the revolution is actually a revolution around culture, around how
we do things,
how we engage, for example. So it might not be like toppling of the government or like in quote, we are more or less telling ourselves, what do we want to our future, our ideology as a nation, our culture to be, right? So it's sort of a very different way of looking at it, more of a battle of ideas rather than like personalities or,
And I also think the revolution is about being inclusive and recognizing that every generation has a contribution to make. there was someone who challenged us and told us, how can you be planning for the future of children and children are not in the conversation?
Yeah.
How do you plan for the future of your daughter, but that your daughter is not in that conversation? And it reminded me how my dad, when I was in just finishing high school, wanting to go into campus, was sort of planning or, pushing me towards a certain direction. I mean, he wanted me either to be a doctor or an engineer, but not involving me in that conversation.
Because you had the grades to actually
Because I had the grades to pursue that, yeah. And for him, it was obvious, but I was not part of that conversation, yeah. It's just, thank God for my mother who balances my dad, and I eventually they listened to me. But a lot of times that's the mistake we make when we are leading organizations. You plan for employees, you plan for followers, but they are not contributing to that plan. And then you expect it to go well. I mean, they'll probably do it because they are paid. But the last thing,
they're playing a role.
They're playing a role and they want a paycheck at the end of the month. But I think, would you rather not have both? You have someone who, yes, is doing the job because they want to be paid, but also they're just passionate about their job, because they feel involved in the decision. So I think the revolution also is going to involve first a change of what you're saying, culture, mindset, but also where we are including people in conversations. I mean, for me, to be honest, as a Kenyan, when I watched, for instance, what is it called? I think there was a time the president had called religious leaders, for a meeting. And then I looked at those men, I was like, okay, I mean, they were all, I mean, I'm sorry to say this, but, they were all, quite some old men,
Because if you put 10 religious leaders, each, let's say, is 50, those are 500
Those are 500 years, man. 500 years. Wait. I mean, that's a lot. As in, tumeanza kuingia huko ma BC, AD, you know? So I was like, medieval times, yeah? But then the conversation is about 25-year-olds. I'm like, I think it would have been better if maybe those leaders would have said, okay, it's okay, we are coming for the meeting, but allow us to also come
tag along our
juniors, from our churches and bring them on the table, Otherwise, any Gen Z who looked at that was like, you guys, you don't speak for us,
It's so interesting how, like, I think throughout history, if I look at all the great leaders in quotes, whether they did good things or bad things, you look at the Alexander the Great, the Jesus, the Davids, all these people are young, but it's only in Africa. We sort of if you're 40, you're too young to lead.
Exactly. And it's funny you say that, because that's the one thing I keep encouraging the young people around me. That, when you go through the Bible, me, I can only pick two old men, Abraham and Moses. Those were the two guys that were called at 80, But, I mean, before
so
then...
even leading old is the exception.
It was the exception rather than the norm,
But
I mean, the other guys, I mean, you just do data and you do an analysis. I mean, they actually say Jesus, he was 30, and they say actually, the theologians believe that the oldest disciple was Peter, who was his age mate. Everyone else was in there. I mean, everyone else was a Gen Z.
I remember one CEO told me they have this 1,000-day rule. They only they work in an organization for 1,000 days. So, which is roughly like 3 years. So they say, if I've not changed anything within 1,000 days,
it's my time to exit.
I leave, and whatever I've achieved, I'll hand over to the next person. So it's a very interesting way of sort of, I think in one of your pods, you said, you sort of lead to not to be perpetual, not to stay forever. You sort of lead with the aim
of exiting,
of living.
There's actually a mantra that say, you need to work yourself out of your job. Like the moment you get in, start thinking about you get out. And when you look at Jesus, that was, I mean, from day one, he chose success as day one.
Yeah.
You know, I saw one of the CEOs of our big banks, I wouldn't mention his name. He was being asked about succession, and he said, "I'm not worried about succession." I mean, I don't think that's the correct.
I think I know them.
Yeah, you think you know the person. I was like, okay, interesting.
Yeah.
But me, when I look at it, from day one, Jesus had chosen successors. And he worked with them, knowing very well he was working himself out of a job. And, you know, obviously, you know, and maybe, as you're saying, maybe it's an African thing. You know, maybe in Africa, you know, we've been cultured and wired to hold on to things, and we always
have this
wonder
sort of want-on accumulation.
Yes,
you know, like
yes.
I want to accumulate
wealth,
positions, titles, you know,
influence.
women.
Yes, that's
you
the
know,
thing.
everything is many and many.
Yeah.
There's
And we
no-
interpret that as growth. We interpret that as progress. You know, an African, I mean, an African man has 3 houses. You know, the house in the city, then the mansion just outside the city, and then the one in Ushago, and you know what you call the retirement home. Yeah, and if you're really wealthy, you need one on the beach.
Yeah.
But I mean, life can't be about just. I mean, you can still only be in one house at the same time. Yeah. So yeah, maybe so. The revolution, I agree with you, is a change in our mindset, a change in how we engage, and hopefully, we will see some change. Yeah.
So you've said actually interesting nuggets there. So you said for organization, adapting would be leadership.
Yes.
Because you cannot go beyond leadership. It always starts there. And they set the culture, and the culture has to be more of a listening culture, inclusive culture. And then also being conscious that you know, these people that you're trying to set strategy for need to be involved sort of almost actively. So that's quite interesting. And then from back to the individual, because sometimes I say it's very easy to change me or an individual rather than, you know,
changing
an
the system or the
organization, a system.
That's true.
You know, an ecosystem, etc. So for example, on the individual level, if I would ask myself, if for example I feel stuck, you know, there are people who are feeling stuck in their career. How do I get myself out of that sort of, you know, that situation?
So one of the things that I'm a firm believer in, and I get this from the parable of the talents. The parable of the talents is about 3 gentlemen who, you know, their master, their boss, gives them leaves them with an investment. You know, one of them 1 talent, 2 talents, 5 talents. You know, in modern day would say 5 opportunities, or 5,000 shillings, 2,000, 1,000.
Or 5 projects, 3 projects,
1 project. And then the story goes that the 5 project guys, you know, put that, you know, went into those projects. By the time the master was coming, this guy had multiplied to 10 projects. The guy with 2 projects had multiplied to 4. The guy with 1 killed the project. You know, he sold the land and
Aliua
startup. Yeah, I mean, actually, it was those were startups. Literally, they were given startups.
With seed capital.
With seed capital. And one ate the seed capital. You know what? I like that analogy. One ate the seed capital.
Was, corruption,
exactly. And just lack of vision, lack of foresight. And the Bible says he considered his master to be a hard-hearted guy. He was like, this guy doesn't, why should I invest this thing for him? So now the way I also interpret that, so you can interpret that story in many ways, but one of my personal interpretation is I'm a strong believer that, so this, if you're to just use statistics, these were 3 guys. 2 out of the 3 were given more than 1 project. And what usually that tells me, that it's very possible that 2 out of 3 of the world's population can do more than 1 thing. Now, I think what makes us sometimes get trapped in career is to imagine that, remember what I said at the beginning, God gives us things in seed form. To imagine that for me, God has only called me to do finance. And I lock myself in finance. And if finance doesn't work, I get frustrated. If the environment changes and pushes my career out, I get frustrated.
More like we sort of have this tunnel vision.
We have this tunnel vision. And I know there are people who of the school of thought that, you need to focus on one thing for it to work. And fair enough. But this is how I interpret it. All of us, or most of us, I believe we have been given more than one skill, more than one ability, more than one project. I mean, remember, God is a businessman. He's invested in us. I must firmly believe it's more than one. So I think where you start from is at some point in your life, as you and the younger the better, is to deliberately identify what are these skills that I have that God has given me. So you realize that maybe you're a finance person. You also realize that you're gifted in leadership. You realize maybe there's something, maybe you're a musician, maybe you do it as a hobby. Like, I think you guys have watched Dan. He has some, he does music. And maybe we can even assess you, Dan. So Dan, I know you're into energy, for instance. Yes. I know I've seen you lead. So you have a leadership gift. Yeah. I know you as a musician. Yeah. I know you as someone who's passionate about startups and taking risks. Yeah. And I also know you as a father. So those are 5 things. Those are 5 investments God has put in you. Yeah. And you know what? None of these investments, according to God, is supposed to fail. All of them are supposed to work. Remember, the guy who was given 5 talents, accounted for all the 5. He multiplied each of them twice. So all of them work. He wasn't given 5 and returned 9. No, he multiplied each of them. So I think it's first important to identify what is this God has deposited in you. Yeah. So assess yourself. Yeah. And in this day and age, there are many ways you can. I mean, if you just go online, you'll find something that can help you assess your personality, your spiritual gifts. There are many ways you can do it. Temperaments, and they will tell you. In fact, my favorite one is called the 16 personality types. If you just go on Play Store and download the 16 personality types, when you answer the questions and it tells you the personalities, interestingly, it also tells you the careers you can do. And what is interesting is for that personality, you find there are 8 careers that fit your personality. Yeah. So one is to first have the mindset that God has given me more than one talent. That's the first one. Then now, secondly, start looking for them. Yeah. Identify what those skills, those talents are. Yeah. Write them down. Yeah. Some of them most likely are still in seed form. But remember, at some point before you die, they need to have been they need to have been fruitful. And how do you identify? Do a personality test, do a skills test. Ask your friends, ask your closest friends, what do you think I'm good at?
And even take like projects, like
take a project, try out. Yeah. Projects, if it fails, okay, either your gift is still in seed form, or maybe you tried the wrong thing. Yeah. But try out stuff. Yeah. So once you have identified that and you're like, God, I know I'm good at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So first, suddenly your mind opens up. So now, if you take the example of Dan, for instance, like, okay, so I'm an energy expert, but I can also do podcasts, Yeah. So now that is very freeing. In fact, if you look at it as, it's like you have a buffet.
In fact, when I started this, I think I deliberately said the first couple of episodes, I'll not go into my comfort. I'll not do finance, energy, the things
you stretch
I know.
Yourself out.
I'll do something else. Talk to a lawyer, talk to a tech guy, see how it goes,
how it works.
And then I kind of found it quite interesting because now sort of each of those sort of conversations, build onto other things. Yeah.
So, but you see, that's the thing. And what that does is these other things that you are good at, that God has given you, first of all, remove the boredom from your career. Yeah. Because there's a spice there. And it's like you have, it's like if you go to a table and you've been offered a la carte and another one has buffet. I mean, you're most likely drawn to the buffet section because definitely. You have more variety. Yeah. So I'd say that's one way to get out of this career strat. First, just identify, apart from what you're doing primarily, are there other things that you're good at? Assess them, write them, and start thinking, okay, how should I then start investing or working on these things.
Yeah.
Because it's possible that, yes, you might start out as a doctor, but probably you're not necessarily supposed to end up as a doctor. It's funny the way, if I look at something like the music field, which is something I'm interested in, and it's something I've been in. In music, you have someone who's a singer, you have a drummer, but you have a sound guy, you have a guy who repairs the sound, you have a guy who, does the production. I mean, this is just one field, but within that field, there are so many things you can do in the field. But sometimes, you go in there, you're a singer, and you think that's all you can do. So it's important just to open up to your mind to realize that God has given you more than one thing. And what I've learned for my own experience, there are things that that I do. Let's say, for instance, my finance professional that has a certain reward, a monetary reward in this case. But the other things that I do, say I play in the band in our church, that does not have a monetary reward, but it gives me fulfillment. So when I combine the fulfillment that I get from doing music and the monetary reward that I get from finance, then I become more psyched up. That energy,
feeds on
this other profession that I'm doing. And suddenly, if there was any boredom, I'm not.
It's like I see your point. Even me, like if I have a very bad weekend, there's a likelihood I will carry
have a bad week.
So even those people call Monday blues, or, sometimes it's not even about the Monday. It's just you had a bad Sunday, a bad Saturday.
Yes. So it feeds.
Then
it
you
feeds
blame
in.
Monday.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So I mean, start from there. But the other thing about just getting out of just this quagmire of feeling you're not growing is learn. Always look to learn. What is it in your skill? What is it in your field that is happening? And are you aware of what's going on? Finance, for instance, is evolving. I mean, a few years back, we didn't have anything like crypto, for instance. Now we have crypto. I mean, learn about it. Not necessarily, you might not necessarily do anything about it, but just at least get to know. And then you'll decide whether it's something to venture in or not to venture in. So I think it's also important just to always go back to school. And in this day and age, like of late, I've been doing courses on Udemy. And it's very interesting how, education is so accessible that you don't have to actually sit in a university class. It's out there. It's out there on YouTube. Even if you just subscribe to TED Talks, there's always something to learn. Because we sometimes we get stuck because our mind is also stuck. We are stuck on this way of doing things, and we imagine everyone is doing things like that. But if you just opened up your mind and went back to school, take a course, in your field, what's going on, what's changing in your field, you'll be shocked. The people we left with in campus, it's very interesting how many of us are doing different things. When we're in campus, all of us thought we were going to be auditors, but most of us, I mean, we are still in finance, but very different fields of finance.
Tangents,
very different tangents. Yet generally, you'd say we are still finance professionals. And those who thought outside the box, I mean, they are getting good rewards. So study, just take time to study.
And then just as we'll sort of try to land the plane, in looking at, for some people, the way to unstuck themselves is being employers. So how do there are those people now, you like, they don't fit
in employment.
But we are trying as much as we can to fit this round peg in a square hole. How maybe talk to those people also.
So basically, to people who feel like employment is not their thing.
Yes. But now, maybe there's also a need to transit or pivot in a healthy just
way.
Go into a plunge and then.
It's true.
Yeah.
So first of all, for me, there's nothing like employment, or rather, how do I put this? We like to differentiate self-employment and employment and think these are two different things. For me, it's the same thing. The employers are different. When you're employed in an organization, your employer is your boss and that organization. when you're self-employed, your employer is a customer. So none of them is free.
You're still reporting to
You're
someone.
still reporting to someone. Someone still needs something from you. And sometimes self-employment, you can't even define who that employer is, which sometimes is even trickier. And I've had conversations with friends of mine who are in employment, and those who are in business, and they would tell me this thing. I won't tell you that self-employment is superior to employment. I think for me, what's usually important is first, we go back to that whole skill thing. Identify what you're good at. Identify what you're passionate about. Identify what is it that you've been gifted. And especially if you can find a way of aligning your natural gift into a profession, that's really good. In fact, it now won't even really matter whether you're employed or self-employed. However, I tend to think that people who want self-employment, what they want is a bit of control. They want to control their time. They want to control.
It's like we want the rewards of. In some cases, we want just the rewards. What self-employment can do.
Yes, and how it looks, and sometimes and sometimes it's a perception. But I think the truth is, it's not that simple. Self-employment is. I mean, you just need to talk to entrepreneurs. It's not as rosy as it looks. Sometimes it's because
also has its
downtimes. And it's just sometimes I feel like, especially in Africa, we sometimes are very not honest. You never talk about. I usually say, if you're driving an old car, you never trash the old car. You only talk about the problems of the old car once you've disposed it. So it's the same thing. When people are in employment or self-employment, they would rarely talk about the bad side of it until they're out of it, which means sometimes you never really get the full story of, what's the other side of self-employment. However, if you feel that you want to venture out into self-employment and you're in formal employment, I think it's good to have a plan. I think you shouldn't just say, I'm following my passion and walk out. I think it's good to have a clear plan, and especially financial. Now, depending on the stage you are in life, I usually say, if you are younger, if you're, you are a Gen Z, you don't have a family, you're still, living in your parents' home.
Risks.
I mean, please take risks. I mean, this is a time for you to just take risks, take risks. But also not careless risks. They still need to be calculated risks. Just because your parent can host you. Remember, when your parent was taking you to school, he was expecting that when you finish university, you're going to be dependent on yourself and perhaps even help them. So don't lie to yourself that going back home is something that they are very happy about. They may not tell you, but I'm here to speak on their behalf. They want you out there taking care of yourself. Your parents are more proud when you're out there taking care of yourself. So much as a young person, you have the leverage and you have the freedom to take risks. That's because you have a cushion. Don't be careless about it. Calculate those risks. So, but if obviously you have a family, you have obligations, then the calculations are the threshold has to be higher. You can't just quit. The biggest issue usually is financial planning. I think if you're going to quit from employment to self-employment, you know very well that employment gives you stability of income, predictability of income. Self-employment doesn't. And I think it's better to have a plan where, I'll put aside some money that can take care of my basic needs for the next 6 months to 1 year as I venture into self-employment and have them in a fund where you can't access, because, obviously if you go into self-employment and you need capital, you can eat those savings. So you need to have them in a place where this is purely for paying rent, maybe even pay your rent for another 6 months or 9 months. So the landlord knows you're okay. Then go and buy a voucher from the supermarket. At least take care of your basic needs, and especially if you have a family, it's very important. So that when you quit, you're not worried about your basics. I think if you're a couple and both of you are working, I think I usually find that a blessing, because as a couple you can decide that okay, can we adjust our lives? We live on one income. You can divide and conquer. So I like that. Divide and conquer. So say, okay, you know what? Tell your wife, I want to quit. Can we live on your salary as I go and try out this thing? And if you're in agreement, then your spouse becomes your cushion. Then you can go and try out things knowing that at least your partner is taking care of things at home. But in a snapshot, I'd say plan your exit. Don't just follow your heart. Because don't just follow your heart, man.
I always say you follow your heart, and also your landlord will also follow his heart.
That's the thing, and kick you out. So everyone has a heart to follow. So plan. Plan your exit.
And then lastly, on the issue of, I know this is something we'll probably cover in future, like trends. You've mentioned things around disruption, technology. I think culture, demographics are changing. What other things should I be sort of, or someone out there be sort of, placing their pulse on in terms of trends, as that's to inform their career choices, career moves, career pivots, etc.
So critically, we are in a digital age. I mean, everything, whether we like it or not, is going digital. So whatever business you're going to do, whatever career you're going to venture in, if there is a skill that you have to invest in, is your digital skills. I don't know if you have noticed, but I love the way these days CVs are not just on Word format. I mean, people are presenting CVs in very eye-catchy ways. So, and I'm imagining if you're going to apply for a job, I know you have still insisted on, just using your old format of a CV, and someone else has gone to Canva or Publisher and done a very beautiful looking CV. I mean, most likely
or a video demo,
or when they went for an interview, you asked for an opportunity to do a presentation, and they leverage on their digital skills. They're going to have an edge over you. So I think it's important, whichever career you are in, to look at how technology is going to influence your career. Because every career, even agriculture, is going to go, tech.
I remember there was someone when I was doing some study on AI. He was saying we tend to worry about AI taking our jobs. We forget that there'll be employees who are using AI who will take the jobs of the employees who are not using, and that is your immediate threat.
That's true.
Because if the machines run the world at some point, then I don't know. But we tend to worry about things we don't have control, as opposed to the things that if I invest in my digital skills, that has a sort of almost
it gives
impact.
You an edge. And I don't know why also sometimes we worry so much about technology. What we forget is technology is still created by real humans. Technology does not invent itself. I mean, the other day I met a young man who told me he was employed by an AI company to feed information on AI. Because, for instance, if you go to ChatGPT and you ask ChatGPT, give me the last 5 presidents of Kenya. I mean, where does it get that information from? Fine, you'd say it gets it from Google. But where did Google get that information from? There was a human element that fed that information to Google. So there's still a human element in all these things. And interestingly, the other day I was using one of the AI apps, I think Gemini, the one for Google, and it was so shocking just to know how AI still needs human intervention. I asked it about the current president of Kenya. Shocking, it told me Kenya, we still don't have a president. The elections were disputed. So I was like, I thought this thing was so perfect. And I realized
that's good news for the Azimio.
Maybe it's good news for Azimio guys, That's what AI is. Azimio guys, that's what AI is claiming. But then I realized this is what happens when we assume that technology is perfect, that there is no human. Like in that particular case, a human being was more accurate than AI. Think about how Google Maps. How does Google Maps work? Google Maps uses data from real human beings. So for me, I think it would be more prudent to think about how can I grow my digital skills to be the one who even shapes how AI works.
To be in the conversation.
To be in the conversation. To be in the room to say, I want this AI to do this for me. Because it's created by human beings. It's real human beings behind the scenes. And they run on flesh and blood like the rest of us. So whichever career you're in, it's just important to think, how can I use leverage on technology to make this career better, to give myself an edge. Even if you're doing farming, do you have an app where someone in Ukraine can go online and find, there are flowers in Kenya, and can just click on their flower and you get the information and export.
Access,
there's always something that technology can do. Yeah. So leverage on technology. I'd say, there are many other things that can happen, and there are many other things we can discuss in another forum or another podcast on the trends. But I think digitization is a big one. Yeah.
Wow, I think we'll take a pause there. I've learned a lot. I think we've talked about culture, pivots, planning, both at the individual and the corporate level. Both the demand supply side, and then we've talked about managing change, disruption, staying ahead, pivoting. So I think this is quite helpful for many of us, myself included, and I'm sure we'll build on it as we go on. So thank you for your time, Javier.
Thank you so much, Dan.
We'll put all the links to your work, your podcast, where people can engage with you on our description, and keep up the conversation, and also keep up the good work.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.